They said she deserved to die in that cage. The iron bars glowed under the Colorado sun, hot enough to brand flesh. Inside, a woman's breath came in shallow gasps. 5 days without water, without mercy, without hope. The town pretended she didn't exist. But when a widowed cowboy and his 5 daughters rode into that dusty square, one small voice shattered the silence. "Papa, why is that woman locked up out there?" What happened next would set the entire territory ablaze. If you stay until the end, you'll discover why one man's choice changed everything. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat came first. It always did in Colorado territory during the summer of 1882, rolling across the flatlands like an invisible fire, turning the air thick and merciless. By noon, the sun sat directly overhead, white and furious, beating down on the town of Redemption Springs with the kind of intensity that made men seek shade and animals go still. The wooden building seemed to sag under the weight of it. Dust hung suspended in the air, too exhausted to settle. And in the center of the town square, where everyone could see but no one wanted to look, stood the cage. It wasn't large, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, constructed of iron bars that had been welded together by the town blacksmith 3 years prior. Originally, it had been meant for drunks and petty thieves, a place to sober up or think about what they'd done. A night, maybe 2 at most. Never this, never 5 days under the naked sun with no shelter, no water, no end in sight. Inside the cage, Eliza Moore was dying. She sat with her back against the bars, her legs drawn up weakly to her chest. Her dress, once a faded blue cotton, now stained with sweat and dust, and things she tried not to think about, clung to her thin frame. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around her face. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, split open from dehydration. Her skin, once pale, was burned raw across her cheekbones and the bridge of her nose. Blisters had formed on her shoulders where the sun had found bare skin. She'd stopped counting the hours sometime yesterday. Time had become meaningless, measured only in the arc of the sun across the sky and the deepening ache in her bones. Morning brought no relief, just the knowledge that another day of torment stretched ahead. Afternoon was the worst, when the metal bars became too hot to touch, and the air itself seemed to scorch her lungs with every breath. Evening offered a brief respite, a few hours of relative coolness before the night brought its own misery, the cold that sank into her burned skin, making her shiver uncontrollably while her fever raged. The townspeople walked past. They always did. A woman in a green dress hurried by, pulling her young son along when he stopped to stare. "Don't look, Timothy. That's not our concern." 2 men stood near the general store, smoking cigars and talking about cattle prices. One of them glanced toward the cage, then away again, as if Eliza were nothing more than an unpleasant piece of scenery. A group of boys, none older than 12, gathered at a safe distance. One of them picked up a clod of dried dirt and threw it. It hit the bars with a hollow clang, sending up a small cloud of dust. Eliza didn't flinch. She barely registered it anymore. "Bet she dies today," one boy said, his voice carrying across the square. "Nah, she'll last another day at least. My pa says women are tougher than they look." "Your pa's an idiot." They laughed and threw more dirt, treating her suffering like entertainment, like a game with stakes that didn't matter. Eliza closed her eyes and tried to remember water. Real water, cold and clean, the way it had tasted back in Kansas before everything went wrong. She imagined plunging her face into a stream, feeling it wash away the grit and heat and pain. But the fantasy only made the thirst worse, made her throat constrict with need so powerful it was almost a physical force. She'd tried begging on the second day. "Please," she'd whispered to anyone who came close enough to hear. "Just water, please." No one had answered. By the 3rd day, she'd stopped trying. The sheriff had made his position clear when they locked her in here. "You're a drifter, a troublemaker, and a liar," he'd said, standing outside the cage with his arms crossed over his broad chest. "This town doesn't owe you a damn thing. You'll stay here until you tell the truth about who you're running from or until you die. Either way, the problem solves itself." She'd told him the truth. He hadn't believed her. No one did. Because the truth was impossible. Or at least that's what they claimed. The truth was that she'd escaped from a man who treated women like property, who bought and sold them as if they were livestock, who kept them locked away in a compound 50 miles south of here. The truth was that she'd run for 3 weeks, sleeping in ditches and abandoned barns, eating whatever she could find, always moving because if she stopped, he would catch her. And when she'd stumbled into Redemption Springs, exhausted and desperate, hoping for help, she'd found this instead. The cage, the heat, the slow public execution disguised as frontier justice. Now, on the 5th day, she could feel her body giving up. Her heartbeat had become irregular, fluttering weakly in her chest like a trapped bird. Her vision blurred at the edges, darkening in a way that she knew meant unconsciousness wasn't far off. Part of her welcomed it. Sleep would be a mercy. Death would be freedom. She let her head fall back against the bars, feeling the hot metal against her skull, and stared up at the sky. It was cloudless, endlessly blue, stretching away into a distance she would never reach. "I'm sorry, Mama," she thought. "I tried." The sound of wagon wheels on dirt made her eyes drift half open. Not unusual. Wagons came and went all day long. She'd learned to ignore them, to save her diminishing energy for the slim possibility that someone might actually care enough to intervene. But this wagon didn't pass by. It stopped. Eliza heard voices. A man's deep rumble, followed by higher, younger tones. Children. She couldn't make out the words, didn't have the strength to try. Her eyes slid closed again. Then, cutting through the fog of her consciousness, came a single question that seemed impossibly loud. "Papa, why is that woman locked up out there?" A child's voice. Young, maybe 8 or 9 years old, clear and honest in the way only children could be, asking the question that every adult had trained themselves not to ask. Eliza's eyes opened. Through the wavering heat and the blur of dehydration, she saw them. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and beside him, 5 girls of varying heights, all of them staring directly at the cage, directly at her. The man didn't answer immediately. He stood very still, his hand resting on the shoulder of the girl who'd spoken. For a long moment, he just looked at Eliza, and she looked back, too tired to feel shame, too far gone to care what he saw. Then he moved. He walked toward the cage with long, purposeful strides, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. As he got closer, Eliza could see his face, weathered and lined, probably in his mid-30s, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His jaw was set in a hard line, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet from the cage and crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with her. "Can you hear me?" His voice was rough, like gravel and smoke, but not unkind. Eliza tried to nod. It came out as more of a tremor. "How long have you been in here?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her throat was too dry. No sound came out except a faint rasp. The man's eyes narrowed. He stood up sharply and turned, scanning the square. "Where's the sheriff?" An older man sitting outside the barber shop pointed down the street. "Office is that way, stranger, but if you're thinking about that woman, I'd advise you to mind your business. She's where she belongs." The cowboy's expression darkened. "Nobody belongs in a cage like this. She's a liar and a drifter. Sheriff's waiting for her to confess who she's running from." "Looks to me like she's dying." The old man shrugged. "That's her choice. All she has to do is tell the truth." For a moment, the cowboy didn't respond. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something quiet and dangerous. "You're all standing here watching a woman die of thirst, and you think that's justice? We think it's none of your concern." The cowboy stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then he turned back to the cage, back to Eliza. "I'm going to get you out," he said. Eliza blinked slowly, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Her mind felt disconnected from her body, floating somewhere above the pain and heat. The man straightened and walked toward the building marked Sheriff in faded white letters. His daughters followed, a small procession of bonnets and wide eyes. The oldest couldn't have been more than 13. The youngest looked barely 5. Eliza watched them go, her vision swimming. She wanted to call out, to warn him that the sheriff wouldn't listen, that no one in this town would help her. But the words wouldn't come. She could only sit there leaning against the bars, feeling her heartbeat grow weaker with every passing second. Inside the sheriff's office, Caleb Whitman didn't bother with pleasantries. The sheriff was a heavy-set man with a thick mustache and small, mean eyes. He looked up from his desk with annoyance when Caleb walked in. "Help you with something?" "The woman in the cage," Caleb said flatly. "You're going to let her out." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Am I now?" "She's been out there 5 days with no water, no shelter. That's not justice, that's murder." "That's persuasion," the sheriff corrected. "She tells me who she's running from. She goes free." "She looks like she's about to die." "Then she better talk fast." Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice level. "What's she accused of?" "Being a drifter. Lying about where she came from. Probably theft. Though we haven't proven that yet." "You lock people in cages without a trial here?" The sheriff's expression hardened. "We handle things the way we see fit. This is a small town, stranger. We don't need outside interference." "I'm not interfering. I'm paying." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He dropped it on the desk with a heavy thud. "That's $60, more than enough to cover any fine you might have imposed." The sheriff stared at the pouch, but didn't touch it. "This isn't about money. Everything's about money. You want her to confess to something you think she did. I'm offering you cash instead. Seems like a better deal to me. And what's she to you, your wife? Sister? A human being dying in a cage." The sheriff snorted. "You're one of those types. Bleeding heart. Think you can save everyone." "I don't need to save everyone, just her." Caleb leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the desk. "Take the money. Open the cage. Let me be on my way." For a long moment, the sheriff said nothing. He picked up the pouch, testing its weight. $60 was a lot of money, more than most people in Redemption Springs saw in 6 months. Finally, he stood. "Fine, but when she causes trouble, don't come crying to me." "I won't." The sheriff grabbed a ring of keys from a hook on the wall and led Caleb back out into the square. The girls had gathered near the cage, keeping their distance but watching Eliza with concerned faces. The youngest one was crying quietly. The sheriff unlocked the cage door with a loud clank of metal on metal. "She's all yours, stranger. Good riddance." Caleb pulled the door open and stepped inside. The heat radiating from the bars was intense, almost unbearable even for someone who'd just arrived. He couldn't imagine what 5 days of this had done to her. Eliza looked up at him with glazed eyes, barely conscious. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Caleb crouched down and carefully slid one arm under her legs, the other around her back. She weighed almost nothing, just bones and burned skin and the faint, desperate rhythm of a failing heart. He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest as he stepped out of the cage. The town watched in silence. No one helped. No one protested. They just stood there, bearing witness to their own indifference. "Papa, is she going to be okay?" The voice belonged to Sarah, his eldest daughter, her face pale with worry. "I don't know, sweetheart," Caleb said honestly, "but we're going to try." He carried Eliza to the wagon and laid her carefully in the back, on a pile of blankets the girls quickly arranged. Her breathing was shallow, her skin hot to the touch. Mary, his second oldest, handed him a canteen of water. "Not too much at first," Caleb murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He tilted Eliza's head back gently and brought the canteen to her cracked lips. "Just a little. Easy." The water touched her mouth and she gasped, her body reacting instinctively. Her eyes fluttered open and she drank, desperately, choking on it, water spilling down her chin. Caleb pulled the canteen back. "Slow," he said firmly. "You'll make yourself sick." Eliza's eyes focused on him for the first time, really seeing him. There was confusion there, and fear, and something else. Disbelief, maybe. As if kindness were a language she'd forgotten how to understand. "You're safe now," Caleb told her. He wasn't sure if she believed him. He wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. But as he climbed onto the driver's seat and snapped the reins, guiding the horses away from Redemption Springs and toward the open country where his ranch waited, he made a decision. Whatever this woman was running from, whoever wanted her back, they'd have to go through him first. Behind them, the empty cage stood in the square, its door hanging open, a monument to cruelty that the town would pretend had never existed. But Caleb Whitman remembered, and he wasn't the kind of man who looked away. The wagon rolled steadily through the afternoon heat, putting distance between them and the town with every turn of the wheels. The girl sat quietly in the back, stealing glances at the unconscious woman lying among the blankets. Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon, where the land stretched out in waves of gold and brown, broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. His ranch was 2 hours northwest, nestled in a valley where a creek ran year-round and the grass grew thick enough to feed cattle through the summer. It wasn't much, a main house, a barn, some outbuildings, but it was theirs. He'd built most of it himself after his wife died, working through the grief with hammer and nails, creating something solid and real that couldn't be taken away. "Papa?" The voice was small, tentative. Grace, his youngest, who still sucked her thumb when she thought no one was looking. "Yes, sweetheart?" "What's her name?" Caleb realized he didn't know. He'd paid for her freedom, carried her away from death, and he didn't even know her name. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "We'll ask her when she wakes up." "If she wakes up," Sarah said quietly. "She will," Caleb said with more confidence than he felt. "She's tough. Had to be to survive this long." The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon when they finally reached the ranch. The house came into view first, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and windows that caught the last of the golden light. The barn stood behind it, solid and weathered, flanked by corrals where their horses grazed. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. "Sarah, Mary, get the door. Hannah, fetch fresh water from the pump. Grace, Ruth, stay out of the way." The girls scrambled into motion, each knowing their role. Caleb climbed into the back of the wagon and gathered Eliza into his arms again. She stirred slightly, a small sound escaping her throat, but didn't wake. Inside, the house was dim and cool, a refuge from the relentless heat. Caleb carried Eliza to the spare bedroom, the one that had been his and Helen's before she died, the one he hadn't been able to bring himself to sleep in since. He laid Eliza on the bed as gently as he could. Sarah appeared with a basin of water and clean cloths. At 13, she'd become the little mother of the family, stepping into a role she was too young for, but bore with quiet strength. "Should I fetch the doctor?" she asked. Caleb considered. The nearest doctor was in a town 15 miles south. By the time they got there and back, it would be nightfall. And he wasn't sure there was much a doctor could do that they couldn't do themselves. Not yet, he decided. Let's get her cleaned up first, get some more water in her. We'll see how she is in the morning. For the next hour, they worked together, Caleb and his daughters, this makeshift family that had learned to function without a mother. They wiped the dirt and sweat from Eliza's skin with cool cloths. They coaxed small sips of water between her lips. Sarah found one of Helen's old nightgowns, and they carefully changed Eliza out of her filthy dress. The burns on her shoulders and face were severe, the skin red and blistered. Mary made a paste from aloe plants that grew near the creek, and they applied it gently to the worst areas. Eliza whimpered, but didn't wake. As the light faded outside and shadows filled the room, Caleb sat in a chair beside the bed, watching Eliza breathe. Each breath was a small victory, evidence that she was still fighting, still holding on. Ruth poked her head through the doorway. "Papa, is she going to stay with us?" "For now," Caleb said, "until she's well enough to decide what she wants to do." "I hope she stays," Ruth said, then disappeared before Caleb could respond. He sat there as darkness settled over the ranch, as his daughters went to bed one by one, as the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes filled the air. And he wondered what he'd gotten himself into, because he recognized something in Eliza's face, even unconscious and ravaged by sun and thirst. He recognized the look of someone running from something worse than death. He'd seen it before, in the eyes of slaves escaping north before the war, in women fleeing violent husbands, in men who'd witnessed things that haunted them. She wasn't just a drifter. She was prey. And somewhere out there, a predator was looking for her. Near midnight, Eliza's eyes opened. For a moment, she didn't move, just stared at the ceiling in confusion. This wasn't the cage. Wasn't the burning sun or the iron bars or the endless thirst. This was soft, cool, dark. She turned her head slowly and saw him, the man from the square, sitting in a chair beside the bed, his head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed. Asleep. Memory came flooding back. The cage. The question from a child. This man's face. His voice. You're safe now. Eliza tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her head and her body protested every movement. She fell back against the pillows with a small gasp. The sound woke Caleb. His eyes snapped open and he sat forward, instantly alert. Easy, he said. Don't try to move too fast. Eliza stared at him, her throat working, trying to form words. Where? My ranch, about 2 hours from Redemption Springs. He reached for a cup of water on the bedside table. Here, drink. She took the cup with trembling hands and sipped carefully, remembering his earlier warning. The water was cool and clean, the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. How long? She whispered. Since I brought you here? About 8 hours? Since you were in that cage? Too damn long. His expression hardened. 5 days, they said. Eliza nodded weakly. What's your name? Eliza. Eliza Moore. Caleb Whitman. He gestured vaguely toward the rest of the house. I've got 5 daughters. They helped get you cleaned up and settled. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why did you help me? Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. Because it was right, he said finally. Because my daughters were watching, and I needed them to see what decent people do when someone needs help. Because, he paused, looking away. Because nobody deserves to die like that. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, the first tears in days. She'd been too dehydrated to cry before. They won't stop looking for me. Who won't? The men I ran from. The sheriff in Redemption Springs probably sent word. They'll know someone took me. They'll come. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, you need to rest and get your strength back. We can talk about the rest tomorrow. But Eliza shook her head, sudden urgency flooding through her. You don't understand. The man I escaped from, Marcus Donovan, he owns half the territory. Judges, sheriffs, politicians. He has connections everywhere, and he doesn't let anyone go. Ever. What did he want with you? Eliza's hands tightened around the cup. He runs a compound south of here, brings in women from back east, promises them jobs, new lives. Then he takes their papers, locks them up, forces them to work. Some in his house. Some he sells to other men. Some... She couldn't finish. Caleb's face had gone very still, very cold. How long were you there? 3 years. Since I was 17. How did you escape? A fire. In one of the outbuildings. During the confusion, I ran. I've been running for 3 weeks. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought I'd made it far enough. I thought I was safe. You are safe, Caleb said firmly. No one is safe from Marcus Donovan. Then he hasn't met me yet. Despite everything, Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the relief of not being alone anymore. Why are you doing this? She asked again. You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. My wife died 2 years ago. Childbirth. The baby too. He didn't turn around. I watched her slip away and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Couldn't save her. Couldn't save our son. Just had to stand there and watch everything fall apart. He was silent for a long moment. So when I see someone I can save, I'm not going to stand there and do nothing. Not again. Eliza understood then. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person Caleb Whitman hadn't been able to help, every moment of powerlessness that had haunted him since his wife died. She was his second chance. Thank you, she whispered. He turned from the window and nodded once. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. As he moved toward the door, Eliza called out softly, Mr. Whitman? He paused. Your daughters. They're lucky to have you. Something shifted in his expression, grief and pride and love all mixed together. I'm the lucky one, he said. Then he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him. Eliza lay back in the darkness, feeling her body start to relax for the first time in weeks. She was still in danger, Marcus Donovan would still be looking for her. The men would still come. But tonight, in this house with this strange family that had chosen to help her, she was safe. And tomorrow would have to be enough. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee brewing. Eliza woke slowly, disoriented by the softness of the bed and the coolness of the room. For a moment she thought she was back in Kansas, in her childhood home before everything went wrong. Then memory returned, the cage, the heat, the man who'd paid for her freedom. She sat up carefully, testing her body's limits. Everything hurt, but it was a different kind of pain than the cage had brought. This was the pain of healing, of a body trying to repair itself. The burns on her shoulders throbbed dully, her head ached, but she was alive. The door opened quietly and a girl appeared, the oldest one, Sarah. She carried a tray with bread, butter, and a cup of what smelled like tea. "You're awake," Sarah said, not quite smiling, but not unfriendly either. "Papa said you'd probably sleep until noon, but I thought I'd check." "What time is it?" "About 7. We've been up since 5. There's always work on a ranch." Sarah set the tray on the bedside table. "How do you feel?" "Like I was locked in a cage for 5 days, Eliza said, then immediately felt bad for the sharpness in her tone. "I'm sorry, that was—" "Honest," Sarah interrupted. "You don't need to apologize for being honest." She studied Eliza with eyes that seemed older than her years. "Papa says you're in trouble, that men are looking for you." Eliza's stomach tightened. "He told you?" "He tells us everything important. Says we deserve to know what's happening in our own home." Sarah crossed her arms. "Are we in danger because you're here?" The directness of the question caught Eliza off guard. Most people would have danced around it, hidden behind politeness. But this girl wanted the truth. "Yes," Eliza said quietly. "If the men tracking me find out where I am, they'll come for me, and they won't care who gets in the way." Sarah nodded slowly, processing this. "That's what I thought. Mary thinks we should send you away before they come. Hannah thinks we should hide you. Ruth and Grace are too young to understand." She paused. "I think we should let Papa decide." "And what does your Papa think?" "That you're staying until you're well enough to make your own choices. And that if anyone tries to take you against your will, they'll have to deal with him first." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "He's stubborn like that. Once he decides something's right, there's no changing his mind." Eliza felt that strange loosening in her chest again, the one that might be hope. "You have a good father." "I know." Sarah moved toward the door. "Eat something. Papa wants to talk to you when you're ready. No rush, though. He's out mending fences with Hannah." After Sarah left, Eliza ate slowly, forcing herself to take small bites even though her body wanted to devour everything at once. The bread was fresh, still warm from the oven. The butter melted on her tongue. Simple food, but after 5 days of nothing, it tasted like a feast. When she'd finished, she found the clothes Sarah had left folded on a chair. Another of Helen's dresses. This one a simple brown cotton with small white flowers. It fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the shoulders. Eliza caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the wash basin and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath sunburned skin. Her eyes looked haunted. She splashed water on her face and tried to tame her hair into something presentable, then made her way out of the room. The main part of the house was simple but well kept. A large kitchen with a wood stove dominated one side. A sitting area with handmade furniture occupied the other. Everything was clean and organized, the kind of home that spoke of discipline and care. Through the window she could see the barn and corrals, and beyond them, the rolling hills of the territory stretching away toward distant mountains. Mary was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She looked up when Eliza entered. "There's more coffee if you want it," Mary said, gesturing toward the pot on the stove. She was maybe 11 or 12, with her father's dark eyes and a serious expression that made her seem older. "Thank you." Eliza poured herself a cup and stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure what to do with herself. "Papa's out by the north fence," Mary said without looking up. "Straight past the barn, follow the creek. You can't miss him." Eliza found Caleb exactly where Mary had indicated, working alongside Hannah to replace a section of broken fence. He looked up as she approached. wiping sweat from his forehead. "You should be resting," he said. "I've been resting for 12 hours. I needed to move." Eliza stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain. "Your daughter said you wanted to talk." Caleb handed his hammer to Hannah. "Keep working on this section. I'll be back in a few minutes." Hannah nodded and went back to hammering nails with surprising competence for someone who couldn't be more than 10. Caleb walked with Eliza along the creek, away from the house. The water burbled over smooth stones, creating a sound that was almost peaceful. For a while, neither of them spoke. "I need to know what we're dealing with," Caleb said finally. "This man you're running from, Marcus Donovan. Tell me everything." Eliza took a breath. She'd told the story to the sheriff in Redemption Springs, and he hadn't believed her. But something about Caleb's steady presence made her think he might be different. "I was 17 when I left Kansas," she began. "My parents died of fever within 2 weeks of each other. I had no other family, no money, nothing. A man came through town recruiting women for domestic positions in Colorado Territory. Good wages, room and board, respectable work. It seemed like a miracle. But it wasn't. No. There were 12 of us on the wagon train west. By the time we reached Donovan's compound, he'd taken all our papers, all our money, said it was for safekeeping. When we arrived, he told us the terms had changed. We owed him for transport, for room and board. Until we paid off our debt, we belonged to him." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "Some of us worked in his house, cooking, cleaning, serving his guests. Some worked in the compound's other buildings. And some," her voice caught, "some he sold to other men, for a night, a week, forever. It didn't matter. We were property to him. How many women? At any given time, maybe 30, but they cycle through. New ones coming in, old ones disappearing. I don't know where they all go." "And you were there for 3 years?" 3 years, 2 months, 17 days. The precision of the number surprised even her, but she'd counted every single one. "I tried to escape twice before. The first time they caught me 2 miles from the compound. Donovan locked me in a cellar for a week with no food. The second time, I made it almost to the territorial border. They brought me back and—" She couldn't finish that sentence. Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I need to know, will he kill you if he gets you back?" "Eventually, yes. But first he'll make an example of me. He has to. If one woman escapes and stays free, others will try. He can't allow that." "How many men does he have?" 10 that live on the compound full-time. But he has connections. Lawmen, politicians, businessmen. He can call in favors across 3 territories. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I meant what I said last night. You're safe here. If Donovan's men come, they'll have to go through me." "You don't understand what you're up against," Eliza said desperately. "These aren't petty criminals. They're organized, well-funded, and they don't care about the law. Neither do I, when it comes to protecting my family." He met her eyes. "And right now, you're part of my family. That's how it works on this ranch. You're under my roof. You're mine to protect." The certainty in his voice was almost frightening. Eliza had learned not to trust certainty. It usually led to disappointment, but there was something in Caleb Whitman's eyes that made her want to believe him. "I should leave," she said quietly, "before they find me here, before I bring danger to your daughters." "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Further north. Maybe Canada." "You got any money?" She shook her head. "Any connections? People who'd help you?" "No." "Then you'd make it maybe a week before you either starved or got caught." Caleb's tone softened slightly. "Look, I understand the impulse to run, but sometimes standing your ground is the better option. Standing my ground got me locked in a cage. That was a town full of cowards who chose to look the other way. This is different." He gestured back toward the ranch house. "You see those girls? I'm teaching them that when something's wrong, you don't ignore it. You don't run from it. You face it, and you do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Eliza felt tears threatening again. "Why do you care so much?" "Because somebody should." He started walking back toward the house. "Come on, you can help Mary with the bread if you're feeling up to it, or just rest. Either way, you're staying." The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Eliza's strength returned slowly but steadily. She helped where she could, cooking, mending clothes, tending the small vegetable garden behind the house. The girls treated her with a mixture of curiosity and cautious acceptance. Grace, the youngest, took to following her around like a shadow. Ruth asked endless questions about where Eliza had come from and what Kansas was like. Hannah was quieter, but offered small kindnesses. A cup of water when Eliza looked tired, a shady spot to sit when the sun got too hot. Only Mary remained distant, watching Eliza with guarded eyes. On the fourth day, Eliza found her alone in the barn, mucking out stalls. "Can I help?" Eliza asked. Mary didn't look up. "I've got it." "I know, but I'd like to help anyway." Mary drove the pitchfork into the hay with more force than necessary. "Why are you really here?" "Your father brought me here." "That's not what I mean." Mary finally looked at her, and Eliza saw fear underneath the hostility. "You're going to leave eventually. Everyone leaves. And when you do, it's going to hurt Papa again, just like when Mama died." Understanding dawned. "You think I'm going to break your father's heart? I think you're going to make him care about you, and then you're going to disappear. Either those men will take you, or you'll run, or you'll just decide you don't want to be here anymore. And Papa will blame himself for not protecting you, the same way he blames himself for not saving Mama." The perception was startling coming from someone so young. But Mary had been watching her father grieve for 2 years. She'd learned to read the warning signs. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Eliza said quietly. "Especially not your father. He saved my life." "Then leave before he gets too attached." "It might be too late for that." Eliza picked up a second pitchfork. "For both of us." Mary's expression flickered, surprise maybe, or recognition. She turned back to her work without responding, but when Eliza started helping with the stalls, she didn't object. They worked in silence for a while before Mary spoke again. "What was it like? In that cage?" Eliza considered lying, protecting this girl from ugly truths, but Mary had asked for honesty, and she deserved it. "Like dying slowly," Eliza said, "like being completely powerless while the world watched and did nothing, like losing faith that anyone would ever help." "But Papa did." "Yes, he did." Mary drove the pitchfork into fresh hay. "He's going to fight for you, you know, when those men come. He's going to put himself between you and them, and he's going to fight." "I know." "Are you worth it?" The question hung in the air, brutal and necessary. Eliza met Mary's eyes. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm going to try to be." Something shifted in Mary's expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. A week after Eliza's arrival, trouble rode into the ranch. It was late afternoon when the rider appeared on the horizon. Sarah spotted him first from her position on the porch, where she'd been reading to Grace. She called for her father immediately. Caleb came out of the barn, Hannah behind him. He stood in the yard watching the approaching horse, one hand resting casually on the rifle he'd started carrying. The rider was young, maybe 20, with a badge pinned to his vest. He pulled up 10 feet from the house and dismounted. "Help you with something?" Caleb asked. "Looking for a woman. Dark hair, about 20 years old, thin build, goes by Eliza Moore." The deputy's eyes scanned the property. "Got word she might have passed through this area." "Who's asking?" "I'm Deputy Collins out of Redemption Springs. We're following up on some questions about her." "Thought the sheriff already had his questions answered," Caleb said mildly, "seeing as he locked her in a cage for 5 days without trial." Collins had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That was... Sheriff Benson has his own way of doing things, but we received a telegram from down south. Seems Miss Moore is wanted for theft and contract violation. Man named Marcus Donovan is offering a reward for her return." "Donovan." Caleb's voice went flat. "The same man who runs that compound where he keeps women prisoner?" "I don't know anything about that. I just know there's a warrant and a reward." Collins pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "Says here she stole money and valuable items before fleeing her legal employment." "Legal employment." Caleb's laugh was harsh. "Is that what we're calling slavery now?" "Sir, I'm just doing my job. If you've seen her..." "I've seen her," Caleb interrupted. "Found her dying in your sheriff's cage. Paid $60 to get her out. Brought her here to recover." Colin's hand drifted toward his gun. Then I'm going to need you to turn her over. In an instant, Caleb had his rifle leveled. Not going to happen. The deputy froze. Sir, you're interfering with the law. I'm protecting an innocent woman from being returned to a man who treated her like property. If that's against the law, then your law is broken. Inside the house, Eliza had heard everything. She stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart hammering. Sarah appeared beside her, young face set with determination. Stay inside, Sarah whispered. Papa will handle this. But Eliza couldn't let Caleb risk everything for her. She moved toward the door. Sarah grabbed her arm. Don't. You'll just make it worse. He's going to get hurt because of me. He's going to get hurt if you go out there and distract him. Sarah's grip tightened. Trust him, please. Outside, the standoff continued. I don't want trouble, Colin said, his voice strained. But I can't go back empty-handed. Donovan's got connections. If I don't bring her in, someone else will. Someone who won't be as reasonable. Then tell Donovan she's not here. Tell him she died in the desert. Tell him whatever you want. But you're not taking her. There are legal channels. Legal channels didn't stop your sheriff from torturing her. Legal channels won't stop Donovan from doing worse. Caleb's voice dropped. I've got 5 daughters watching this conversation. I need them to see that sometimes you have to stand up to corrupt authority, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. So you can ride back and tell your sheriff and Donovan and whoever else is interested that Eliza Moore is under my protection now. And if anyone wants to challenge that, they know where to find me. Colin stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised his hands and stepped back. I can't promise this ends here, he said. Donovan's not the kind of man who takes no for an answer. Neither am I. The deputy mounted his horse, still watching Caleb warily. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. As Collins rode away, Caleb didn't lower the rifle until the deputy was out of sight. Then he let out a long breath and turned back toward the house. Eliza met him on the porch. Her face was pale but composed. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Had to. He's right. This won't end here. Donovan will send more men. Then we'll deal with them too. Caleb set the rifle aside. I'm not sending you back to that. Not now, not ever. Even if it means putting your daughters in danger? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he called out. Girls, come here, please. They emerged one by one. Sarah, Mary, Hannah, Ruth, and Grace. They gathered on the porch, faces ranging from determined to frightened. You all heard what just happened, Caleb said. You understand that keeping Eliza here might bring trouble to this ranch. They nodded. I need you to understand something else. We don't turn away people who need help just because it's inconvenient or dangerous. We don't stand by while injustice happens. Your mother taught me that, and I'm teaching it to you. He looked at each of them in turn. But this is your home too, so I'm asking, should Eliza stay? Grace raised her hand immediately. Yes. Me too, Ruth said. Hannah nodded firmly. Sarah met her father's eyes. She stays. Everyone turned to Mary. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched out. Finally, she spoke. If she's willing to fight instead of run, then she stays. Caleb looked at Eliza. Well? Eliza felt something break open inside her chest. All the fear and desperation and loneliness of the past 3 years flooding out, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten. Family. Belonging. Home. I'll fight, she said. Then it settled. Caleb picked up his rifle again. From now on, we keep watch. We keep shifts, day and night. Nobody goes anywhere alone. We secure the barn, reinforce the doors, make sure we've got clear lines of sight around the property. He looked at Sarah. Can you handle a rifle? You taught me. Then you're on the rotation too. Mary, Hannah, you'll help your sisters with chores and keeping the young ones safe. He turned to Eliza. And you need to teach us everything you know about Donovan and his men. How they operate, what to expect, any weaknesses. Eliza nodded. He'll send at least 5 men, maybe more. They'll try to take me alive if they can, but they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in the way. They usually scout first, watch for patterns, wait for the right moment. Then we don't give them the right moment. Caleb's expression hardened into something determined and dangerous. We make this ranch a fortress, and we make it clear that anyone who comes for you is going to pay a price. Over the next 2 days, the ranch transformed. Caleb and the girls worked from dawn until dusk, turning their home into something defensible. They moved livestock closer to the house, cleared brush that could provide cover, reinforced windows and doors. Caleb distributed weapons, rifles, a shotgun, even an old revolver that he taught Eliza to load and fire. Aim for center mass, he instructed, standing behind her as she practiced on tin cans set up in the yard. Don't try for fancy shots, just point and squeeze. Eliza's hands shook the first few times, but gradually she found her rhythm. The recoil jarred her shoulders. The noise made her ears ring, but she kept practicing until she could hit the targets more often than not. You're a natural, Caleb said, and something in his voice made her look at him. There was an expression on his face she couldn't quite read, pride maybe, or something deeper. Their eyes met and held for a moment too long. Thank you, Eliza said quietly, for all of this, for believing me when no one else would. Easy to believe the truth when you're actually listening. He moved closer, adjusting her grip on the revolver. His hands were warm and calloused and steady. You don't have to thank me, Eliza. This is what people should do for each other. But they don't. Most people don't. Then most people are wrong. He stepped back, creating distance again. Try it one more time, faster this time. She raised the gun, aimed, fired. The can flew backward off the fence post. Good, Caleb said. Real good. That night, as Eliza took her turn on watch, sitting on the porch with the rifle across her lap, Sarah came out and sat beside her. Can't sleep? Eliza asked. Thinking too much. Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest. About what happens if they come. About whether we're strong enough to stop them. Your father is the strongest man I've ever met. Strong isn't always enough. Sarah's voice was small in the darkness. Mama was strong too. It didn't save her. Eliza understood then. Every act of protection Caleb performed, every stand he took, was shadowed by the one time he couldn't protect the person he loved most. Sometimes strength is all we have, Eliza said gently. Sometimes it has to be enough. They sat in silence, watching the darkness beyond the ranch, waiting for the trouble they both knew was coming. It arrived 3 nights later, not with thunder, but with whispers. Hannah saw them first. She'd been on watch in the loft of the barn, positioned where she could see the approaches from 3 directions. It was just past midnight when she caught the movement, shadows separating from shadows, low and careful, coming from the east where the creek provided cover. She didn't cry out. Caleb had trained them better than that. Instead, she grabbed the rope they'd rigged and pulled it 3 times, sending the signal through a system of bells that would wake everyone in the house without alerting the intruders. In the main house, Caleb was out of bed before the 3rd ring finished echoing. He'd been sleeping in his clothes for the past week, boots beside the bed, rifle within arm's reach. He grabbed both and moved quickly down the hallway, tapping on doors as he passed. Positions, he said quietly. Now. The girls responded with the efficiency of repeated drills. Sarah took Grace and Ruth to the reinforced pantry they'd converted into a safe room. Mary grabbed the shotgun and moved to the upstairs window that offered the best view of the yard. Eliza appeared from her room already dressed. The revolver Caleb had given her held steady in her hand. How many? Caleb asked, checking the load in his rifle. Hannah's signal was 3 pulls, Eliza said. That means multiple targets, east approach. They'd developed the system over the past week. 1 pull for a single rider, 2 for animals or false alarms, 3 for real danger. Hannah had never used 3 before. Caleb moved to the front window, staying back from the glass. The yard was dark, except for the single lantern they kept burning on the porch. Beyond its circle of light, the night was impenetrable. But he knew his land, knew every rock and tree and shadow, and he could feel them out there, watching, waiting. They'll want to scout first, Eliza whispered beside him. See how many of us there are, where we're positioned. Donovan's men are careful. They don't rush in blind. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe less. Her voice was tight with tension. Once they know the layout, they'll move fast. As if in confirmation, a voice called out from the darkness. Caleb Whitman, We don't want trouble with you. Just send out the woman and we'll be on our way. Caleb recognized the voice. Not the deputy who'd come before, but someone older, more confident, someone used to being obeyed. Not happening, Caleb shouted back. Leave now and nobody gets hurt. A laugh drifted across the yard. You've got guts, I'll give you that, but you're outnumbered and outgunned. There are 6 of us and 1 of you, maybe 2 if the woman can shoot. You really want to die for a runaway whore? Eliza flinched at the word, but her grip on the revolver never wavered. My daughters are watching, Caleb called out. I want them to hear what kind of men would hunt a woman like an animal. I want them to remember that when this is over. Touching, but it doesn't change the math. A pause. Last chance, Whitman. Send her out, or we come in and take her. Caleb's response was to raise his rifle and fire a shot into the darkness, deliberately high. The crack of gunfire shattered the night. That's my answer, he shouted. Come try. For a moment, nothing happened. Then all hell broke loose. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 different positions around the yard. Bullets smashed through windows, splintered wood, ricocheted off stone. Caleb dropped below the windowsill, pulling Eliza down with him. Glass showered over their heads. Mary, he shouted. I see them. Mary's voice came from upstairs, followed by the boom of the shotgun. 2 on the left, near the water trough. Caleb rolled to a different window and returned fire, aiming for the muzzle flashes. He heard a grunt of pain, then cursing. At least 1 hit. The gunfire intensified. They were trying to pin everyone down, create chaos and confusion. Caleb had expected this. What he hadn't expected was the smell. Smoke. The barn! Eliza gasped, seeing the orange glow beginning to bloom in the darkness. They set the barn on fire. Caleb's heart dropped. Hannah was still in the barn. He ran for the back door, Eliza right behind him. Stay here, he ordered. Like hell. There was no time to argue. He burst out into the yard, rifle up, scanning for targets. 2 men were visible now, silhouetted against the growing flames. Caleb fired twice. 1 man dropped. The other dove for cover. The barn was fully ablaze now, flames crawling up the dry wood with terrifying speed. The horses inside were screaming, panicked by the smoke and heat. Hannah! Caleb shouted. A small figure appeared in the loft opening, coughing. Hannah's face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide with fear. Jump! Caleb yelled. I'll catch you! Hannah didn't hesitate. She launched herself from the loft as flames burst through the opening behind her. Caleb caught her, stumbling backward from the impact, then ran with her toward the house as bullets kicked up dirt around their feet. Eliza provided covering fire, her shots wild but effective enough to make the attackers keep their heads down. They made it to the porch and crashed through the door just as more windows exploded inward from renewed gunfire. Are you hurt? Caleb asked, setting Hannah down and checking her for injuries. No, just scared. Hannah was shaking but trying to be brave. They shot a flaming arrow into the hay. I couldn't stop it. You did good getting out. Caleb squeezed her shoulder. Go to the safe room with your sisters. But Hannah shook her head. I can still fight. You're 10 years old. Mama would have fought. The statement hit Caleb like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter, this child who should have been playing with dolls, not holding a rifle, and saw Helen's fierce determination staring back at him. All right, he said quietly. But you stay away from the windows and you don't take any risks. Understood? Hannah nodded and took up a position in the hallway where she could see both doors. Outside, the barn was a roaring inferno now, lighting up the entire yard in flickering orange. The horses had broken out of their stalls and were galloping away into the darkness. Caleb watched years of work, countless hours of sweat and effort, burn to ash and tried not to think about what it meant for their survival. Whitman, the voice came again, closer now. Your barn's gone. Your house is next. Send out the woman before you lose everything. Caleb looked at Eliza. Her face was set, determined, but he could see the guilt eating at her. Don't even think about it, he said. All of this is because of me. Your barn, your home, your daughter's in danger. My choice, Caleb interrupted. My stand. Don't you dare try to take that away from me. Mary's voice rang out from upstairs. They're moving. 3 coming from the left. Caleb ran to the window. Through the smoke and firelight, he could see them advancing on the house. dark shapes moving with military precision. These weren't random thugs. These were men who knew what they were doing. Aim for their legs, he told Mary. Slow them down, but don't kill if you can help it. I don't want my daughters living with that. He fired, caught one man in the thigh. The man went down screaming. The other two scattered, returning fire that forced Caleb back from the window. The attack continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The men outside were relentless, working in coordinated bursts of gunfire that kept everyone pinned down. Caleb moved from window to window, trying to cover all approaches, while Eliza and Mary did the same. Then something hit the roof. The sound was unmistakable, breaking glass followed by the whoosh of igniting liquid. Kerosene. They're burning us out, Eliza said, her voice tight with horror. Smoke began filtering down from the ceiling. Caleb could hear the crackle of flames above their heads, spreading faster than seemed possible in the dry summer heat. We can't stay here, Mary said, coughing. Caleb's mind raced through options. The safe room would protect the girls from bullets, but not from fire. Going outside meant exposing everyone to gunfire, but staying meant burning alive. Get the girls, he said to Eliza. We're making a run for it. To where? The creek. The water will give us cover, and the cottonwoods will provide concealment. It's our best chance. Eliza ran to get Sarah and the younger girls, while Caleb and Mary laid down suppressing fire. The smoke was getting thicker now, making it hard to breathe, hard to see. Flames were visible through cracks in the ceiling. Sarah emerged carrying Grace, with Ruth clinging to her dress. Their faces were pale but composed. Caleb had never been more proud of them in his life. Listen to me, he said, kneeling down to their level. We're going to run to the creek, stay low, stay together, and don't stop no matter what you hear. Mary and I will cover you. Eliza will lead. Do you understand? They nodded, even Grace, who was crying but trying to be quiet about it. On three, Caleb said. He positioned himself at the front door, Mary at the side window. 1, 2, 3. He kicked the door open and they ran. A desperate sprint across open ground with bullets whining past their heads. Caleb fired as he ran, not aiming, just trying to keep the attackers from drawing a clean bead. Mary's shotgun boomed from behind. Sarah stumbled but kept her feet, Grace bouncing in her arms. They made it halfway across the yard when Ruth went down. She didn't cry out, just crumpled silently into the dirt. Sarah screamed and turned back, but Caleb was already there, scooping Ruth up without breaking stride. Blood was spreading across her shoulder, a graze, not a direct hit, but enough to drop her. Keep moving, he shouted. They crashed through the brush along the creek and half ran, half slid down the bank. The water was shallow, but blessedly cool. Caleb set Ruth down gently, pressing his hand against the wound. I'm okay, Papa, Ruth whispered, her face white with shock. It just stings. You're being very brave. Caleb's voice was steady even as his hands shook. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound the wound as tightly as he could. The bleeding was already slowing. She'd been incredibly lucky. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed now, flames shooting through the roof, windows exploding from the heat. Everything they owned, every memory of Helen, every piece of the life they'd built, gone. Eliza crouched beside him, her face anguished. I'm so sorry, I should never have— Stop, Caleb said firmly. This isn't your fault. This is on the men who did it. Remember that. Gunfire raked the brush above their heads. The attackers knew where they'd gone and were trying to flush them out. But the creek bed was deeper than it looked, carved out over years of spring floods, and the overhanging cottonwoods provided good cover. How long can we hold here? Sarah asked. Dawn's maybe 4 hours away, Caleb said. They won't want to stay past first light. Too much risk of being seen. If we can last until then, they'll have to pull back. And then what? Mary asked. Where do we go? Everything's gone. It was a question Caleb didn't have an answer for. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built, reduced to ash and memory in one night. But he couldn't think about that now. Right now, survival was all that mattered. We'll figure it out, he said. We always do. They settled into positions along the creek bank, weapons ready, watching the burning ruins of their home. Occasionally, one of Donovan's men would try to advance, and they'd drive him back with gunfire. But mostly, it was a waiting game now. Grace fell asleep against Eliza's shoulder, exhausted from fear and adrenaline. Ruth drifted in and out, feverish from the wound but stable. Hannah kept watch with the intensity of someone twice her age. Mary and Sarah took turns with the guns, their faces hard with determination and loss. And Caleb sat with his back against a cottonwood, watching his home burn, and tried not to think about failure. Eliza moved to sit beside him. "You should have let me go. None of this would have happened." "All of this would have happened anyway," Caleb said. "Just to you instead of us. And you'd be back in Donovan's hands, probably dead within a week. At least this way you're alive. That has to count for something." "Does it? Look at what it cost." She gestured at the burning house, at Ruth's bandaged shoulder, at the girls huddled in the creek bed. "Everything you had, everything you built for your family, all gone because of me." "Not gone. Changed." Caleb's voice was quiet but firm. "There's a difference. Things can be rebuilt, lives can't." "But what do we do now? Where do we go?" Caleb had been thinking about that. "There's a settlement about 2 days north of here, New Haven, started by farmers and families looking to build something different. They don't much care for territorial politics or powerful men throwing their weight around. If we can make it there, we might find shelter. 2 days through open country with 5 children and Donovan's men hunting us. I've done harder things." He looked at her, really looked at her, in the flickering light from the burning house. "We all have." As the night wore on, the flames began to die down. The house collapsed in on itself with a groan of breaking timber, sending up a shower of sparks that drifted into the darkness like dying stars. The barn was nothing but a skeleton now, black bones against the sky. The shooting had stopped. Donovan's men had pulled back. Whether to regroup or to wait for dawn, Caleb couldn't be sure. But the temporary lull gave them time to rest, to tend wounds, to plan their next move. "We'll leave at first light," Caleb decided, "before they realize we're gone. Take only what we can carry, move fast and quiet." "And if they follow?" Sarah asked. "Then we deal with it, together." He looked at each of his daughters in turn, then at Eliza. "We're still a family. As long as we have that, we have everything that matters." Mary made a small sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "Mama used to say that." She was right. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they gathered their meager possessions: a rifle, a shotgun, 2 revolvers, and whatever ammunition they could carry, a few blankets, a canteen of water, the clothes on their backs. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. They moved out as the sun broke the horizon, heading north through terrain that was all scorched earth and dry grass. Caleb led, constantly scanning for threats. Eliza brought up the rear, watching their back trail. The girls stayed in the middle, helping each other over rough ground, never complaining. By midday, they'd put 5 miles between themselves and the ruins of the ranch. Caleb allowed a brief rest in the shade of some rocks. Ruth's wound had started bleeding again from the exertion, so he changed the bandage and made her drink water. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than the house," Ruth said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They pushed on through the afternoon heat, the sun beating down mercilessly on the exposed landscape. Grace had to be carried after the first hour. Hannah developed a limp but refused to admit it. Mary's face was set in grim determination, Sarah's in quiet despair. And Eliza walked with the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders, watching this family suffer for her freedom. That night they camped in a dried wash, not daring to light a fire. They ate dried meat and hardtack, passing the canteen around in silence. The girls fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted beyond measure. Caleb took first watch, sitting on a rock outcropping where he could see in all directions. Eliza joined him despite his protests that she should rest. "Can't sleep," she said simply. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the territory, distant coyotes, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the wind moving through the grass. "Do you regret it?" Eliza asked finally. "Taking me from that cage?" Caleb considered the question. His home was gone. His barn was ashes. His daughter had been shot. They were refugees now, running with nothing but the clothes on their backs and weapons in their hands. By any measure, the past 2 weeks had been a disaster. "No," he said, "I don't regret it." "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." He looked at her. "You want to know what I regret?" I regret that the world is the kind of place where men like Donovan exist. I regret that my daughters had to learn how cruel people can be. I regret that we couldn't stand our ground and make them pay for what they did. But I don't regret helping you. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Eliza felt tears on her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. I don't deserve you, any of you. That's not for you to decide. You're part of this family now. We don't abandon family. Even when it costs everything? Especially then. They continued north the next day, moving slower now. Ruth's fever had worsened overnight, and she needed frequent rests. Grace was too tired to walk at all. They were leaving a trail that anyone with basic tracking skills could follow. It was only a matter of time before Donovan's men found them again. The settlement of New Haven appeared on the horizon near dusk of the second day, a collection of wooden buildings arranged around a central square, surrounded by farmland and protected by a simple palisade fence. It wasn't much, but compared to sleeping in the open with nothing, it looked like paradise. They approached cautiously, Caleb keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons. A guard challenged them at the gate, a middle-aged woman with a rifle and a no-nonsense expression. "State your business," she said. "Looking for shelter," Caleb replied. "We had some trouble down south, lost our home, got 5 children who need rest and medical attention." The woman's eyes swept over the group, taking in their exhausted faces, Ruth's blood-stained bandage, the weapons they carried. Her expression softened slightly. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that involves powerful men who think they own people. The kind that ends with everything you have burning to the ground." The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but your weapons stay with me while you're inside, and if you bring your trouble here, we'll deal with it together. That's how New Haven works." "Fair enough?" She opened the gate and led them inside. The settlement was small, maybe 20 families at most, but clean and well organized. People stopped to stare as they passed, but the looks were curious rather than hostile. The guard, who introduced herself as Martha Hayes, brought them to a small house near the center of the settlement. "You can stay here for now. It belonged to a family that moved on last month. There's beds and a working stove. Doc Brennan lives 3 doors down. I'll send him over to look at the girl." "Thank you," Caleb said, meaning it more than he could express. "Don't thank me yet. You said powerful men are after you. That true?" "Yes, ma'am. Man named Marcus Donovan. Runs a compound south of here. He's got hired guns and connections throughout the territory." Martha's expression hardened. "I've heard of Donovan, heard what he does to women, heard how the territorial authorities look the other way because he pays them to." She looked at Eliza. "You escaped from him?" Eliza nodded. "Then you're welcome here. New Haven was founded by people who were tired of corrupt officials and men who think money makes them kings. We don't turn away folks running from that kind of tyranny." She paused. "But I won't lie to you. If Donovan comes here looking for you, it won't just be your fight. It'll be all of ours. Are you prepared for that?" Caleb stepped forward. "We won't ask you to fight our battles." "You're not asking. I'm telling. That's the deal in New Haven. We stand together or we fall separately. Everyone who lives here knows that." Martha's voice was firm. "So the question is, are you ready to be part of a community that fights for what's right, even when it's hard?" Caleb looked at Eliza, then at his daughters. They were exhausted, traumatized, running on nothing but determination and hope. But in their eyes, he saw the same steel that had kept them going through 2 days of running. "Yes," he said, "we are." "Good. Then welcome to New Haven." Martha turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Donovan's men, how far behind you?" "We got a 2-day head start, but we weren't moving fast. They could be here by tomorrow, maybe the day after." "Then we've got work to do." Martha's expression was grim but determined. "I'll call a town meeting tonight. Get everyone prepared. If they're coming, they'll find us ready." As Martha walked away to spread the word, Caleb led his family inside the small house. It was simple but clean, with real beds and solid walls and a roof that wasn't on fire. The girls collapsed onto the beds with groans of relief. Even Mary, who'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, finally let herself cry. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching this family she'd brought so much suffering to, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. "I should leave," she said quietly, "before Donovan gets here. Draw them away from the settlement. Caleb was beside her in 2 strides. No. But, no, he repeated more firmly. We've had this conversation. You're staying. We're fighting. Together. That's the end of it. People could die. People could die if we do nothing too. Sometimes the only choice is which fight to pick. He put his hand on her shoulder. This is the fight we're picking, all of us. That night, the entire settlement gathered in the central square. Men and women, young and old, farmers and shopkeepers and craftsmen, all of them listening as Martha explained the situation. Marcus Donovan's men are coming, she said without preamble. They're after a woman who escaped from his compound, a woman we've given shelter to. We have maybe a day to prepare, maybe less. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some faces showed fear, others showed anger. A few showed grim acceptance. Now, I won't force anyone to fight, Martha continued. If you want to leave until this is over, that's your right. But remember why we built New Haven. Remember what we're trying to create here, a place where justice matters more than money, where good people can stand against corrupt power. If we give in now, if we hand over someone who needs our protection just because it's safer, then we might as well give up everything this settlement stands for. A man in the back spoke up. How many men is Donovan sending? We don't know for sure, at least 6, maybe more. And we're supposed to fight trained gunmen? Most of us are farmers. Most of them are bullies who've never faced people willing to stand up to them, Caleb said, stepping forward. They burned my ranch, shot my daughter, tried to kill my family. They did it because they thought we were alone, helpless. Show them you're not, and they'll think twice. Another voice. What if they don't? What if they attack anyway? Then we fight, Martha said simply. Together, the way we've always said we would. The crowd fell silent. Caleb could see the calculation happening on each face, weighing safety against principle, fear against righteousness. It was the same calculation he'd made standing in that square in Redemption Springs, deciding whether to open that cage. Finally, an older man stepped forward. My name's Jacob Brennan. I'm the doctor here. I've treated wounds from men like Donovan before, women he brutalized, families he destroyed. If he's coming here, I say we make him regret it. Others began to speak up, voices rising in agreement. Not everyone. A few families quietly slipped away, choosing safety over confrontation. But most stayed. Most decided that this was the line they wouldn't cross. By the time the meeting ended, New Haven had made its choice. They would stand together, and when Donovan's men came, they would be ready. The preparations began at first light. Men who'd spent their lives behind plows now practiced with rifles. Women who'd only fired weapons at coyotes threatening their chickens learned to shoot at human targets. Children were drilled on where to hide and what to do if shooting started. The entire settlement transformed from a peaceful farming community into something that resembled a fort. Caleb worked alongside them, his experience evident in every instruction he gave. He showed them how to create firing positions using overturned wagons and stacked barrels. He explained the importance of clear lines of sight and protected retreat routes. He taught them to shoot in coordinated volleys rather than wasting ammunition on individual shots. They'll try to intimidate you first, he said to a group of farmers gathered near the palisade. They'll make threats, show their weapons, try to make you back down without a fight. Don't let them. Stand firm, and they'll realize this isn't going to be as easy as they thought. Martha organized the women into teams, some to handle ammunition distribution, others to provide medical support, still others to manage fire suppression in case Donovan's men tried the same tactic they'd used at the ranch. Every person had a role. Every person knew what was expected. Eliza moved through the settlement helping where she could, but mostly she watched these strangers prepare to fight for her freedom. The guilt was almost unbearable. She'd tried 3 more times to convince Caleb to let her leave, to draw Donovan's men away from New Haven. Each time he'd refused with increasing firmness. You keep trying to take this burden on yourself, he'd said during their last argument, but it's not just your burden anymore. It's ours. Accept that. Now, as evening approached on what they all knew might be their last peaceful night, Eliza found herself in the small house with the Whitman girls. Ruth was recovering well under Doc Brennan's care, though her shoulder would carry a scar. The younger girls were playing a quiet game in the corner, their laughter subdued but present. Sarah sat by the window watching the preparations outside with troubled eyes. "Do you think we'll die tomorrow?" she asked without preamble. Eliza considered lying, offering false comfort, but Sarah deserved better than that. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Your father's done everything he can to prepare. The settlement is ready, but in a fight, anything can happen." "I'm not afraid of dying," Sarah said quietly. "I'm afraid of watching Papa die, or my sisters, or you." The inclusion of Eliza in that list made her throat tighten. "Your father is the toughest man I've ever met. If anyone can survive this, he can." "Mama was tough too. She still died." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Papa thinks we don't know, but we do. We know he blames himself. We know he thinks if he'd done something different, she'd still be here. And now he's doing the same thing with you, trying to save someone to make up for the one he couldn't save." The insight was devastating in its accuracy. Eliza moved to sit beside Sarah, looking out at the settlement preparing for war. "Maybe that's true," she said, "but it doesn't make his choice wrong. Your father is fighting for what he believes is right. That matters, even if the outcome isn't what we hope for." "Does it matter if we're all dead?" "Yes, because the alternative is living as people who look away when others suffer. Living as cowards who value safety over justice. Your father won't let his daughters grow up to be that kind of people." Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "If something happens to Papa, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Take care of my sisters. Get them somewhere safe. Don't let Donovan have any of us." The request hit Eliza like a physical blow. "Sarah, promise me." Eliza looked at this 13-year-old girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who carried responsibilities no child should bear, and made the only promise she could. "I promise." They came at noon the next day, when the sun was at its highest, and the heat made the air shimmer above the dry earth. Caleb spotted them first from his position on the palisade wall. 6 riders approaching from the south, moving with the confidence of men who expected no real resistance. He recognized the lead rider even at a distance, the same man who'd called out during the attack on the ranch, the one who'd called Eliza a whore. "Positions," Caleb called out quietly. The word rippled through the settlement like a wave. People who'd been going about ordinary tasks suddenly weren't. They disappeared into prepared positions, took up weapons, made themselves ready. By the time Donovan's men reached the gate, New Haven appeared almost deserted. Just Martha standing at the entrance, arms crossed, and Caleb visible on the wall above. The lead rider pulled up 10 feet from the gate. He was a lean man in his 40s with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that showed no warmth. "I'm looking for Marcus Donovan's property," he said without preamble. "Woman by the name of Eliza Moore. We tracked her here. Send her out and we'll be on our way." "Nobody here is anybody's property," Martha replied, "and we don't hand over people who've asked for our protection." The man's expression didn't change. "You're harboring a criminal. That makes you accomplices. Mr. Donovan has friends in the territorial government. You're making a mistake you'll regret. We've made our choice. Now you need to make yours. Leave peacefully or face the consequences." The man laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Look around, old woman. 6 of us. And how many of you? A dozen farmers with squirrel rifles? You're not equipped for this fight." "Maybe not," Martha said calmly. "But we're committed to it. Are you?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. He'd expected fear, capitulation, maybe a token resistance at most. What he was getting instead was quiet determination backed by preparation. His eyes scanned the settlement, noting the defensive positions, the absence of civilians, the weapons visible at strategic points. "This is your last warning," he said. "Hand over the woman or we'll take her by force." Caleb spoke from his position on the wall. "You burned my home, shot my daughter, tried to kill my family. You think I'm going to let you take the person you did all that for? You think any of us are?" The scarred man looked up at Caleb with something like recognition. "You're the rancher, the one who paid to get her out of that cage in Redemption Springs." "That's right. $60 to buy yourself all this trouble. Was she worth it?" Caleb's answer was simple and absolute. "Yes." The man studied him for a moment, then shook his head. You're a fool, rancher, but I'll give you credit for commitment. He turned his horse. We'll be back, with more men, and next time we won't bother asking nicely. They rode away, not in defeat, but in tactical withdrawal. Regrouping, planning, coming back with reinforcements and a better strategy. The settlement exhaled collectively as the riders disappeared over the horizon. How long do we have? Someone asked. Day at most, Caleb said. They'll ride hard to wherever their main camp is, gather more men, come back before we can fortify further or call for help. Should we send for the marshal? Doc Brennan suggested. The territorial authorities? Martha snorted. The same authorities Donovan has in his pocket? They'd be more likely to help him than us. Then we're on our own. We've always been on our own, Martha said. That's why we built New Haven in the first place, to be the kind of community that doesn't need corrupt officials to protect us. We protect ourselves. But even as she spoke with confidence, Caleb could see the worry in her eyes. 6 men they might have handled. But Donovan wouldn't send 6 next time. He'd send 20, maybe 30. Overwhelming force to crush any resistance and send a message to anyone else who might think about defying him. The odds were getting worse by the hour. That night, a rider arrived from the east, a young man on an exhausted horse covered in dust from hard travel. He identified himself as Thomas Perry, a farmer from a settlement 2 days away. Heard you might be having trouble with Marcus Donovan, he said, accepting water gratefully. My community sent me to tell you, you're not alone. We've been dealing with Donovan's people for years. Harassment, theft, intimidation. We're done backing down. What are you saying? Martha asked. I'm saying we'll stand with you. 15 men, all armed, all ready to fight. They're a day behind me, moving as fast as they can. Thomas's young face was set with determination. Donovan thinks he can pick us off one settlement at a time. Time to show him what happens when we stand together. The news spread through New Haven like wildfire. Suddenly, they weren't alone anymore. The impossible odds had shifted slightly in their favor. More riders arrived throughout the night and into the next morning. A small ranching community from the west sent 8 men. A mining camp sent 6. Even a few scattered homesteaders came. Individuals who'd suffered under Donovan's expanding influence and saw this as their chance to push back. By noon of the second day, New Haven had transformed from a vulnerable farming settlement into something more formidable. Nearly 40 armed men and women, united by shared grievance and determination. It still wasn't an army, but it was enough to make Donovan's men think twice. Caleb stood on the palisade wall, looking at the defenders gathered below, and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about protecting Eliza anymore. This was about something larger, a community deciding that certain lines couldn't be crossed, that certain evils couldn't be tolerated. Eliza joined him on the wall, her presence steady and quiet beside him. This isn't what I wanted, she said softly. All these people risking everything because I ran away from a monster. You're still thinking about it wrong, Caleb replied. They're not here because of you. They're here because of him. Because Marcus Donovan represents everything they've been running from. Corrupt power, injustice, the idea that might makes right. You just gave them a reason to finally take a stand. And if they die because of that stand, then they die fighting for something that matters. That's more than most people get. Before Eliza could respond, a shout came from the southern watchtower. Riders incoming! A lot of them! Caleb grabbed his spyglass and focused on the horizon. His stomach dropped. There had to be at least 30 riders, maybe more, spread out in a wide line as they approached. Donovan hadn't just sent reinforcements, he'd sent an army. Positions! Martha's voice rang out across the settlement. Everyone to positions! The defenders moved with practiced efficiency, taking up the positions they'd prepared and rehearsed. Farmers crouched behind overturned wagons. Ranchers positioned themselves in second-story windows. The fighters from other settlements integrated seamlessly into New Haven's defensive plan. Caleb descended from the wall and found his daughters. They were in the reinforced root cellar beneath the general store, the safest place in the settlement. Sarah had a rifle. Mary held the shotgun. Hannah, Ruth, and Grace clustered together, trying to be brave. Remember what I taught you, Caleb said. Don't waste ammunition. Don't take unnecessary risks. And if things go badly, we know, Papa, Sarah interrupted. We know. He hugged each of them, trying to memorize the feel of their arms around him, the smell of their hair, everything that made them real and precious and worth fighting for. Then he forced himself to let go and return to the wall. Eliza was waiting for him, revolver in hand, her face set with grim determination. You should be in the cellar with the girls, Caleb said. This is my fight more than anyone's. I belong here. He wanted to argue but knew it would be pointless. Instead, he checked her revolver, making sure it was loaded properly. Their hands touched briefly, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or connection forged in fire and fear. Stay close to me, he said. When the shooting starts, things are going to get chaotic. I will. Donovan's men pulled up just outside rifle range and stopped. The scarred man who'd come before was there, along with someone new. A heavy-set man in expensive clothes riding a black horse. Even at a distance, the way the others deferred to him made his identity clear. Marcus Donovan himself had come. He rode forward slowly, just him and 2 guards stopping at the gate. Up close, he was younger than Eliza had expected, maybe 40, with carefully groomed hair and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty in his eyes. I'm going to give you one opportunity to avoid bloodshed, Donovan called out, his voice cultured and calm. Return my property, Eliza Moore, along with compensation for her theft and the trouble she's caused. Do that, and we leave peacefully. Everyone goes home alive. Martha stepped forward. There's no property here to return, just a free woman who escaped slavery, and we don't negotiate with slavers. Donovan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Slavery is illegal, madam. I run a legitimate employment agency. Miss Moore signed a contract. Under false pretenses, Caleb interrupted from the wall, after you stole her papers and her freedom. We all know what you are, Donovan. Dressing it up in legal language doesn't change the truth. For the first time, Donovan looked directly at Caleb. You're the rancher who's been causing me so much trouble. Whitman, isn't it? I burned your ranch as a warning. Apparently you didn't take the hint. I took it just fine. Here's my response. Donovan smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. You're outnumbered 3-1. Outgunned. Most of your defenders are farmers and shopkeepers playing at being soldiers. This fight will be over in minutes, and many people will die unnecessarily, all to protect one woman who means nothing to any of you. She means everything to us, someone called out from the defenders. Because what you did to her, you could do to any of us, our wives, our daughters. You're the line we won't cross. Other voices joined in, a chorus of agreement and defiance. Donovan's calm facade cracked slightly. You're making a terrible mistake, he said, his voice harder now. I have resources you can't imagine. Connections throughout the territory. Even if you somehow survive today, I'll destroy this settlement piece by piece. Everyone here will suffer for this foolishness. Then you better make sure you win, Martha said, because if you don't, if we drive you off, every other settlement in the territory is going to hear about it. They're going to know that Marcus Donovan can be beaten, and they're going to start standing up to you the way we are right now. The threat landed. Caleb could see it in the way Donovan's jaw tightened, the way his hands gripped his reins. This wasn't just about Eliza anymore. This was about Donovan's entire operation, his reputation, his power. If New Haven won, it would inspire others. It would be the beginning of the end for everything he'd built. So be it, Donovan said quietly. He turned his horse and rode back to his men. Here they come, Caleb said, raising his rifle. Hold steady. Wait for my signal. The attack began with a charge. 30 riders galloping toward the settlement in a thunderous line, firing as they came. The defenders held their fire, nerves stretched tight, waiting for Caleb's command. Steady, he called out. Let them get closer. Steady. The riders were 50 yards away. 40. 30. Now! 40 rifles fired as one. The volley was devastating. Half a dozen riders went down immediately, horses screaming, men tumbling into the dirt. The charge faltered, broke apart as the surviving riders scattered for cover. Reload, Caleb shouted. Second volley on my mark. The defenders reloaded with fumbling haste. Donovan's men had taken cover behind rocks and sparse trees, returning fire now. Bullets smashed into the palisade walls, kicked up dirt, shattered windows. But the defenders were protected. firing from prepared positions, while the attackers were exposed. The battle settled into a deadly exchange. Donovan's men tried twice more to charge the gates, and were driven back both times with heavy casualties. The defenders rotated positions, maintaining steady fire, making every shot count, but numbers were beginning to tell. Donovan had men to spare. He could afford casualties. New Haven couldn't. Already 3 defenders were wounded, 1 seriously. Ammunition was running low. The palisade wall was taking damage, weak points forming where concentrated fire had splintered the wood. "We can't hold forever," Martha said, reloading beside Caleb. Blood ran down her arm from a graze, but she ignored it. "They're going to wear us down and then overwhelm us." Caleb knew she was right. They'd hurt Donovan badly. Maybe 10 of his men were down, dead or wounded. But he still had 20 fresh fighters, and the defenders were exhausted. Then, from the north, came the sound of thunder. At first, Caleb thought it was a storm. Then he saw the dust cloud rising above the hills, heard the unmistakable rhythm of galloping horses. A lot of them. A rider crested the hill, a man in a dark coat with a silver badge pinned to his chest. Behind him came at least 30 mounted men, all armed, all riding hard toward New Haven. Donovan saw them too. He shouted orders, trying to reposition his men to face this new threat. But it was too late. The newcomers hit his flank like a hammer, scattering his forces, driving them back in confusion and panic. The man with the badge rode straight through the chaos to the settlement gate. Up close, Caleb could see he was in his 50s, with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen too much. "I'm Marshal James Thornton," he called up. "Federal Marshal out of Denver. Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on here?" "Marcus Donovan is trying to reclaim a woman who escaped from his compound," Martha said. "We refused to hand her over. He attacked." Thornton's expression darkened. He turned in his saddle, looking at the scattered remnants of Donovan's forces. "Marcus Donovan, Federal Marshal, you and your men are under arrest." Donovan, bleeding from a wound in his side, his expensive clothes torn and dirty, stared at the marshal with pure hatred. "On what charges?" "Start with human trafficking, forced labor, attempted murder, and destruction of property. I've got warrants signed by a federal judge." Thornton gestured to his men, who were rounding up Donovan's fighters. "We've been building a case against you for months. Had testimony from women who escaped your compound. Documented evidence of bribes to territorial officials. We were coming to arrest you anyway. This little war you started just made it easier." "You have no authority here," Donovan snarled. "I know people. You knew people. Past tense." Thornton dismounted and walked toward Donovan, pulling out shackles. "Your connections in the territorial government? They're being arrested too. Turns out the federal government doesn't appreciate officials who ignore slavery in their jurisdiction." The fight went out of Donovan all at once. He slumped in his saddle as Thornton's men pulled him down and put him in chains. His men, seeing their leader captured and federal marshals everywhere, surrendered without further resistance. It was over. The realization spread through the settlement slowly. The shooting had stopped. Donovan was in custody. The threat that had hung over them like a storm cloud for weeks had dissipated in minutes. People began emerging from their positions, looking around in disbelief. Some laughed. Some cried. Some just sat down where they were, overwhelmed by the sudden absence of danger. Caleb found himself on the ground without remembering descending from the wall. Eliza was beside him, and then his daughters were there, pouring out of the cellar, wrapping their arms around him in a tangle of relief and joy and tears. "It's over," Sarah kept saying. "It's really over." Marshal Thornton approached them, his expression gentler now. "You're Caleb Whitman?" "Yes, sir." "Your ranch was burned 3 days ago. That Donovan's doing?" "Yes, sir. He was trying to get to Eliza Moore, the woman he's been after." Thornton looked at Eliza, who stood slightly apart, still processing everything that had happened. "Miss Moore, I'm going to need you to testify against Donovan. Your testimony, combined with what we've already gathered, will put him away for life." Eliza's voice shook when she answered. "He's really going to prison? He can't buy his way out?" "Not this time. Too many witnesses. Too much evidence, too much federal attention." Thornton's expression was grim. "He's done, Miss Moore. You're free." Free. The word seemed impossible, too big to comprehend. Eliza had been running for so long, looking over her shoulder for so many weeks, that freedom felt like a foreign concept. But looking at Caleb and his daughters, at Martha and the defenders of New Haven, at all these people who'd risked everything to stand with her, she began to understand what freedom actually meant. It wasn't just the absence of chains or cages. It was the presence of people who refused to let you face evil alone. As the sun set over New Haven that evening, the settlement gathered for a meal that felt like celebration and memorial combined. They'd won, but the cost was visible in bandages and haunted eyes, and the empty places where 3 defenders had been killed during the fight. Caleb sat with his daughters and Eliza, eating simple food that tasted better than anything he could remember. Around them, people told stories about the battle, embellishing already, turning terror into legend. "What happens now?" Eliza asked quietly. Caleb looked at his girls, then at her. "We rebuild. Start over. Maybe here in New Haven, if they'll have us. Maybe somewhere else. But we do it together." "Together," Mary echoed, and for the first time since her mother died, she smiled at Eliza without reservation. The future was uncertain. The ranch was gone. Everything they'd built was ashes. But they had something more valuable than property or possessions. They had each other. And they had freedom. Hard-won, paid for in blood and fire, but real nonetheless. As the stars came out above New Haven and the sounds of relief and recovery filled the air, Eliza Moore closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of fear finally lifting from her shoulders. She was free, and she was home. The trial took place 6 weeks later in Denver, in a courthouse that smelled of old wood and newer justice. Eliza sat in the witness stand wearing a borrowed dress that Sarah had carefully altered to fit her, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The courtroom was packed, journalists from as far east as Chicago, territorial officials trying to distance themselves from Donovan's corruption, and dozens of women who'd escaped his compound over the years, all waiting to see if the system would finally hold him accountable. Marcus Donovan sat at the defendant's table in expensive clothes that couldn't hide the iron shackles on his wrists. He stared at Eliza with cold hatred, but she didn't look away. Not anymore. "Miss Moore," the prosecutor said gently, "please tell the court how you came to be at Mr. Donovan's compound." Eliza took a breath and began. She told them everything, the false promises, the stolen papers, the 3 years of captivity. She told them about the other women, the ones who'd disappeared, the ones who'd tried to escape and failed. She told them about the fire that had given her the chance to run, and the 3 weeks of terror that followed. And she told them about the cage in Redemption Springs, about dying slowly under the summer sun while a town looked the other way. "But someone did help you," the prosecutor prompted. "Tell us about that." "A man named Caleb Whitman." Eliza's voice steadied as she spoke his name. "He was passing through with his daughters. One of them asked why I was locked up. He didn't ignore the question. He paid to get me out, took me to his ranch, protected me when Donovan's men came. At great personal cost, I understand. They burned his home, shot his daughter, hunted us across the territory." Eliza looked directly at the jury. "He had every reason to hand me over, to protect his family by sacrificing me. But he didn't. He stood his ground and taught his daughters that some things matter more than safety." The testimony continued for 2 days. Other women took the stand, each adding their piece to the damning mosaic of Donovan's crimes. Federal agents presented evidence of bribes and corruption. Marshal Thornton detailed the network of complicit officials who'd enabled Donovan's operation for years. The defense tried to paint Donovan as a legitimate businessman, his accusers as disgruntled former employees. But the evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies too consistent, the pattern too clear. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Women wept. Journalists scrambled to file their stories. Donovan sat motionless as the judge sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison, his face a mask of disbelief that his money and connections had finally failed him. As they led him away, he locked eyes with Eliza one last time. She saw the rage there, the promise of retribution that meant nothing now. He was powerless, caged. The irony wasn't lost on her. Outside the courthouse, Caleb was waiting with his daughters. They'd sat through every day of the trial, a silent show of support that had meant more to Eliza than any words could express. When she emerged into the afternoon sunlight, Grace broke free and ran to her, wrapping small arms around Eliza's waist. "You were so brave," Grace said, "just like Mama would have been." The comparison brought tears to Eliza's eyes. Over the past 6 weeks, the girls had begun including her in their memories of Helen, weaving Eliza into the family narrative as if she'd always belonged there. It was a gift she hadn't known how to ask for, but desperately needed. "It's finished," Caleb said simply, and the weight of those words settled over all of them. The threat that had defined their lives for months was finally, truly over. They stayed in Denver another week while Eliza completed additional testimony for related cases against Donovan's associates and the corrupt officials who'd protected him. The federal government was conducting a sweeping cleanup of territorial administration, and Eliza's story had become the catalyst for reform that lawyers said was decades overdue. But Eliza found herself caring less about the political implications and more about the practical question of what came next. Donovan was imprisoned. The danger had passed. She was free to go anywhere, do anything. The world had opened up in a way that should have felt liberating, but instead felt overwhelming. One evening, as they prepared to return to New Haven, she sat with Caleb on the porch of the boarding house where they'd been staying. The streets of Denver bustled below them, full of life and possibility and choices Eliza didn't know how to make. "I've been thinking about what happens when we get back," she said carefully. "You and the girls will need to rebuild, start fresh, and I should probably move on, let you focus on your family without the complication of—" "Stop," Caleb interrupted. "Just stop." Eliza fell silent, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. Caleb was quiet for a moment, staring out at the street. When he spoke, his voice was softer but no less intense. "Do you remember what I said back at the ranch? About you being part of the family?" "Yes, but that was when we were in danger. Things are different now." "Nothing's different. Not the things that matter." He turned to look at her directly. "My daughters call you by your name now, but I hear it in their voices. They're starting to think of you the way they thought of Helen. Mary asks your opinion on things she used to ask her mother about. Hannah copies the way you braid your hair. Ruth wants you to tuck her in at night. And Grace—" his voice caught slightly. "Grace told me yesterday that she's glad we found you because now she has a mama again." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "Caleb, I can't replace Helen. I would never try to—" "I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to stay. To be part of this family we're building from the pieces of the one I lost." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I'm asking because somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as someone I rescued and started thinking of you as someone I can't imagine living without." The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest. Eliza had felt the shift too, had noticed the way her heart lifted when Caleb walked into a room, the way his rare smiles felt like gifts, the way his strength had become the foundation she built her new life on. But she'd been afraid to acknowledge it, afraid that hoping for happiness was a betrayal of everything she'd survived. "I'm broken," she said softly. 3 years in that compound, everything that happened. I'm not the same person I was before. I don't know if I can be what you need, what your daughters need." "We're all broken," Caleb replied. "Helen's death broke me. This whole ordeal broke my daughters in ways I'm still discovering. But broken doesn't mean worthless. Broken things can be mended. Sometimes they're stronger for it." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Stay with us. Help us rebuild. Not as someone who owes us or someone we're protecting, but as family. As the person my daughters already think you are. As the woman I—" He stopped, searching for words. "As the woman I've come to care for more than I thought I'd ever care for anyone again." Eliza looked down at their joined hands, at the simple physical connection that represented something much more profound. She thought about Sarah's fierce protectiveness, Mary's gradual acceptance, Hannah's quiet support, Ruth's resilience, and Grace's unconditional love. She thought about the family that had chosen her when she had nothing, that had fought for her when the world said she didn't matter. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like coming home. "Yes, I'll stay." Caleb's smile was like sunrise, breaking across his weathered face with genuine joy. He squeezed her hand once, then released it, the gesture somehow conveying everything that words couldn't. They returned to New Haven the next day, riding in a wagon provided by the territorial government as partial compensation for the ranch Donovan's men had destroyed. The settlement had grown in the weeks they'd been gone. New families had arrived, drawn by the story of the community that had stood up to corrupt power and won. Buildings were going up. Fields were being cleared. New Haven was transforming from a hopeful idea into a thriving reality. Martha met them at the gate with news. "The territorial government is offering you compensation for your ranch," she said to Caleb. "Not enough to replace what you lost, but enough to start over. They're also offering land grants to anyone who fought in the defense of the settlement." "Land here?" Caleb asked. "If you want it, we'd be glad to have you permanent." Martha's expression softened. "Your family became part of New Haven the moment you decided to stand with us. Now it's time to make it official." Over the next few months, Caleb and his daughters, and Eliza, who everyone now included without question, built a new home on a plot of land just outside the settlement proper. It was smaller than the ranch had been, but it was theirs. The girls threw themselves into the work with determination that sometimes broke Eliza's heart with its intensity. They were building more than a house. They were building proof that they could survive anything, that loss didn't have to be permanent. Sarah designed the layout, sketching plans that incorporated elements of their old home while creating something distinctly new. Mary oversaw the garden, planting vegetables and herbs with careful precision. Hannah claimed responsibility for the chicken coop, which she built with help from some of the settlement boys who'd started following her around with obvious admiration. Ruth, her shoulder healed but scarred, appointed herself keeper of the family memories, creating a book where she wrote down stories about their mother so Grace would always remember her. And Grace attached herself to Eliza like a shadow, helping with every task, asking endless questions, filling the space that Helen's death had left with the simple, fierce love that children give when they feel safe. Eliza found herself settling into rhythms she'd never experienced before. Morning coffee with Caleb while the girls still slept. Afternoons teaching Ruth and Grace to read while Mary and Hannah worked the garden. Evenings on the porch as the sun set, watching Sarah and Hannah argue good-naturedly about everything and nothing. The ordinary moments of family life that she'd thought she'd never have. One evening, about 4 months after the trial, Caleb found Eliza alone in the garden. The summer heat had finally broken, and the air carried the first hint of autumn's coolness. She was pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, lost in thought. "The girls are asking when we're getting married," Caleb said without preamble. Eliza's hand stilled in the dirt. "What did you tell them?" "That it was up to you, that I hadn't asked yet." He moved closer, kneeling beside her in the garden. "Figured I should probably do that before making promises on your behalf." Eliza sat back on her heels, looking at this man who'd saved her life and then given her something to live for. "You don't have to marry me, Caleb. I'm already part of this family. Nothing needs to change." "I'm not asking because something needs to change. I'm asking because I want to." He pulled a simple ring from his pocket, silver, unadorned, clearly handmade. "I'm not good with words like some men. Can't make fancy speeches or promises about things I can't control, but I can promise you this. I will stand with you the way I stood with you in that square in Redemption Springs. I will fight for you the way I fought when they burned the ranch. I will choose you every single day for the rest of my life." He held out the ring. "Eliza Moore, will you marry me?" Eliza looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the life stretching ahead of them full of possibility and hope. She thought about the cage under the burning sun, about the woman she'd been who'd given up on ever being free. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd survived, how this family had taught her that love wasn't a weakness but the strongest force in the world. "Yes," she said, and this time the word felt like a beginning rather than an ending. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in New Haven's church on a crisp October afternoon, with the entire settlement in attendance. Eliza wore a dress that all 5 girls had helped sew, each one adding their own special touch. Sarah's careful stitching, Mary's embroidered flowers, Hannah's lace trim, Ruth's hand-sewn buttons, and Grace's ribbon at the waist. Martha officiated, speaking about the strength of community and the power of standing together against injustice. She talked about how Eliza's courage and Caleb's conviction had changed New Haven, had changed all of them, had proven that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept cruelty as inevitable. When Caleb and Eliza exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. These were people who'd fought together, bled together, rebuilt together. They understood the significance of this moment. Two broken people choosing to build something whole, two survivors creating a future from the ashes of their pasts. The celebration lasted until well after dark. There was music and dancing, food that people had been saving and preparing for weeks, toasts that grew progressively more emotional as the evening wore on. The girls danced with everyone, their faces flushed with joy and the simple pleasure of being part of something happy after so much hardship. Late in the evening, Eliza found herself standing on the edge of the festivities, watching Caleb dance with grace, the little girl's feet balanced on his boots as he swayed to the music. Sarah and Mary were teaching Ruth some complicated step they'd learned from one of the settlement women. Hannah was being courted by at least 3 different boys, each trying to claim her attention. This was her family now. These were her people. This life, built from nothing but determination and love, was hers. Martha appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of apple cider. She handed one to Eliza. "You look happy," Martha observed. "I am. I didn't think I could be, but I am." "You earned it. Every bit of joy you feel, you fought for." Martha was quiet for a moment. "You know, there are still women trapped in situations like what you escaped. Donovan's compound is shut down, but there are others. There always are." Eliza nodded. She'd been thinking about that too. "I testified at the trial. Maybe that will help others find the courage to come forward." "It already has. We've had 3 women show up at New Haven in the past month, all of them running from similar situations. All of them heard about what happened here, about how the community stood together." Martha looked at Eliza directly. "They ask for you specifically. They want to talk to someone who understands what they've been through." The implication was clear. Eliza had survived, had testified, had helped bring down one of the territory's worst predators. But the work wasn't finished. There were more women who needed help, more battles to fight against the forces that treated human beings as property. "I'll talk to them," Eliza said quietly. "I'll help however I can." "Good. Because this settlement, this community we're building, it needs to be a place where people running from evil can find safety, where the powerless can find strength. You and Caleb proved that's possible. Now we need to make sure it continues." Over the next year, New Haven became known throughout the territory as a refuge. Women escaping abuse found shelter there. Families fleeing corrupt officials found community there. People who'd been told they didn't matter discovered they had value, that they deserved dignity and justice and safety. Eliza became the unofficial coordinator of these efforts, working with Martha and others to create a network of support that extended far beyond the settlement itself. She testified at 3 more trials, helped secure convictions against 2 other men running operations similar to Donovan's, and became something of a reluctant spokesperson for reform. But the work she valued most happened in quiet conversations on her porch, talking with women who'd just escaped their own cages, helping them understand that survival was possible, that healing was real, that life could be more than just running from darkness. Caleb supported her in this work without question, understanding that some wounds could only be healed by helping others with similar scars. The girls pitched in too, learning early that privilege came with responsibility, that their safety meant they had an obligation to help those who weren't safe yet. 2 years after the trial, on a warm summer evening that reminded Eliza painfully of the cage and the burning sun, she stood on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Caleb joined her, as he often did at this time of day, and they stood in comfortable silence. "Grace asked me today if I remembered being in the cage," Eliza said quietly. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I remember everything, the heat, the thirst, the feeling of being completely powerless. But I also remember her question. Papa, why is that woman locked up?" That one question changed everything. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. "She changed my life too. Made me see what I was becoming, someone who could look at injustice and tell himself it wasn't his problem. I never want my daughters to be that person." "They won't be. You made sure of that." They watched the sun sink lower, the light turning everything golden. In the distance, they could see the girls playing near the creek, all 5 of them, plus 2 other children from the settlement who'd become part of their extended family. Their laughter carried on the evening air, pure and joyful. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Staying here instead of going somewhere else? Starting completely fresh where nobody knew your story?" Eliza considered the question. There were days when the weight of her past felt overwhelming, when she wanted to be anonymous, to escape the constant reminder of what she'd survived. But those days were becoming fewer, the good moments outweighing the difficult ones. "No," she said finally. "This is where I belong, with you, with them. With everyone who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." She leaned into Caleb's warmth, watching their daughters play in the fading light, and felt something she'd never expected to feel again after those days in the cage: complete peace. The summer sun that had once been an instrument of torture was now just beautiful, painting the world in warm colors, giving life to the garden, drying the laundry on the line. The heat she'd learned to fear had become ordinary again, something to complain about good-naturedly while drinking cool water and seeking shade. She'd reclaimed the summer, reclaimed her life, reclaimed herself. 3 years later, Eliza gave birth to a son. They named him James, after the marshal who'd arrived when all seemed lost. He was a healthy baby with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determination, and the girls doted on him with fierce protectiveness. "He'll never know what you went through," Sarah said one afternoon, holding her baby brother while he slept. She was 16 now, poised on the edge of adulthood, with suitors calling regularly and her father trying not to panic about losing his oldest to marriage. "He'll grow up in a world where you and Papa are just his parents, not heroes, where New Haven is just home, not a fortress." "That's how it should be," Eliza replied. "Let him have an ordinary childhood. Let him be bored and safe and unaware of how rare that is." But of course, James wouldn't grow up completely unaware. The girls would tell him stories, the way Ruth told Grace about their mother. He'd hear about the cage and the fire, the stand at New Haven, and the trial in Denver. He'd understand that his family had been forged in hardship, that the peace he took for granted had been won through courage and sacrifice. And he'd learn, the way his sisters had learned, that when someone needed help, you didn't look away. 5 years after the cage, Eliza stood at a podium in Denver, addressing a gathering of territorial officials and reformers. Laws had changed because of her testimony, but enforcement was still inconsistent. She'd been invited to speak about the ongoing challenges facing women in the territory, to put a human face on the statistics and legal arguments. "I was dying in that cage," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The town around me had decided I was worthless, that my life didn't matter enough to inconvenience them. And I would have died there if one man hadn't decided to see me as human, as someone worth saving." She paused, looking out at the audience. "But here's what I learned. It shouldn't require extraordinary courage to do the right thing. It shouldn't take a hero to refuse to let someone suffer. What Caleb Whitman did, paying to open that cage, protecting me from the men who hunted me, standing with me when it would have been easier to turn away, that should be ordinary. That should be what any decent person does." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. So when we talk about reform, when we talk about changing laws and enforcement, we're really talking about changing what we consider normal. Making it normal to help instead of ignore. Making it normal to stand up to corruption instead of accepting it. Making it normal to value human dignity over convenience or profit. She finished to thunderous applause, but as she stepped down from the podium, what she thought about wasn't the speech or the reaction. What she thought about was getting home to Caleb and the children, to the ordinary evening routine of dinner and stories and tucking little James into bed. That was the real victory, not the applause or the legal reforms, as important as those were. The real victory was having a home to return to, a family waiting for her, a life that belonged to her and couldn't be taken away. 10 years after the cage, New Haven held a celebration commemorating the stand against Donovan. The settlement had tripled in size, becoming a proper town with a school and a doctor's office and a newspaper that reported on territorial politics with crusading zeal. The younger generation, including Mary and Hannah, both married now with children of their own, had taken up the cause of reform with the intensity of people who'd grown up hearing stories about what their parents had fought for. Eliza and Caleb stood with Martha, watching the festivities with the satisfaction of people who'd built something lasting. "We're getting old," Martha observed. She was in her 70s now, still sharp, but moving slower than she used to. "Speak for yourself," Caleb replied with the dry humor he'd developed as the years softened some of his harder edges. "I am speaking for myself, and for you two. Look at us. Gray hair, creaky joints, grandchildren running around. We're the previous generation now." But Eliza didn't feel old. She felt alive in a way she'd never been before the cage, before Caleb, before she'd learned what it meant to be truly free. Every day was a gift, every moment with her family a treasure, every sunset a reminder that she'd survived and thrived and built a life worth living. "The previous generation gets to rest and let the young ones do the heavy lifting," Martha continued. "Seems fair, after everything we went through." "I'm not ready to rest yet," Eliza said, watching James, now 7 years old, play with his nieces and nephews. "There's still work to do." "There always will be, but you've done your part. More than your part. You turned your suffering into something that helped hundreds of other women. You changed laws. You changed this settlement. You changed the territory." Martha's voice was gentle. "It's okay to just live now, to be happy without feeling like you have to earn it." The words hit Eliza deeply. She'd been running on purpose and mission for so long that she'd forgotten how to simply exist, how to enjoy peace without feeling guilty about it. That night, lying beside Caleb in the darkness of their bedroom, she thought about Martha's words. "Do you think I've done enough?" she asked quietly. Caleb, half asleep, pulled her closer. "Enough for what?" "To make up for everything. To justify what you and the girls sacrificed for me." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't have anything to make up for. You were never a debt to be paid or a burden to carry. You are family. You don't have to earn that. You just have to accept it." Eliza turned to face him in the darkness. "I love you. I don't think I've said that enough. You show it every day, in the way you love our children, in the way you've built this life with me, in the way you turned your pain into purpose." He kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you. Helen would have been proud of you too." The mention of Helen no longer hurt the way it once had. Time and healing had transformed grief into something gentler, memory instead of loss, love that continued even in absence. 15 years after the cage, Eliza received word that Marcus Donovan had died in prison. The news came in a letter from Marshal Thornton, who'd kept in touch over the years with occasional updates on the cases that had stemmed from Donovan's arrest. "He died of fever," the letter read. "No violence, no drama. Just an ordinary death for a man who caused so much extraordinary suffering. I thought you should know that this chapter is finally, completely closed." Eliza read the letter twice, waiting for the emotion to hit. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, or the vindication of seeing her tormentor brought to nothing. But what she felt instead was a mild sort of indifference. Donovan had stopped mattering to her years ago. He'd been a nightmare she'd escaped, a chapter she'd closed, a past she'd moved beyond. His death changed nothing about her life because he no longer had any power over it. She showed the letter to Caleb, who read it and nodded once. Good riddance. That night at dinner, she mentioned it to the family. The older girls barely reacted. They'd long since processed their trauma and moved on to building their own lives. James asked who Donovan was, and Eliza gave him the simplified version appropriate for a 12-year-old. So he was a bad man, and now he's gone, James summarized. That's right. And you're okay? The question, so simple and direct, made Eliza smile. Yes, sweetheart. I'm okay. Better than okay. And it was true. She was happy in a way that felt almost mundane in its completeness. Happy in the garden, happy in the kitchen, happy on the porch watching sunsets, happy in bed beside the man who'd chosen her when she had nothing. 20 years after the cage, Eliza sat on that same porch with Caleb, their hands intertwined in the comfortable way of people who'd spent decades together. They were grandparents now. Sarah had 3 children, Mary had 2, Hannah had 4. Ruth was running the school in New Haven. Grace, the baby who'd been 5 when Eliza first met her, was married to a lawyer and working on territorial reform legislation in Denver. James, their son, was helping his father manage the expanded farm that had grown from the compensation land into a thriving operation. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Caleb asked. "After we came back from Denver. After the trial. You proposed right here in this garden. You cried. I was happy. I didn't know I was allowed to be that happy." Caleb squeezed her hand. "And now? Now I know better. Happiness isn't something you earn or deserve. It's something you choose, every day, despite everything that tries to take it away." They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold. The same light that had once burned her in that cage now felt like a blessing, warm and gentle on her aging skin. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been, broken and dying, powerless and hopeless, locked in iron under a merciless sun. She thought about the question that had saved her life. "Papa, why is that woman locked up out there?" She thought about every choice that had followed, every moment of courage and fear, every sacrifice and triumph. And she thought about this moment, right now, sitting beside the man she loved in a home they'd built together, surrounded by a family that had chosen her and been chosen by her. "I was left to die in that cage," she said softly. Caleb looked at her, understanding in his eyes. "But you didn't die. You lived. You fought. You won." Eliza smiled, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "No. We lived. We fought. We won. All of us together. Us." As the stars came out above their home and the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted through the evening air, Eliza Moore Whitman closed her eyes and breathed in the sweet summer air that no longer held any fear for her. She had been lost in darkness, caged and dying. Now she lived fully in the light, surrounded by love, anchored by family, defined not by what she'd survived, but by everything she'd built from the ashes of that survival. She was free, and she was home. And that, finally, was enough.